May, welcome to episode 10 of the Fair Go Basic Income Discussion Group. We discuss all things basic income, especially relevant to the Australian context. Thank you for joining us. May is the Deputy Director of Anglicare Australia. They've recently conducted a bunch of polling about basic income and poverty in Australia. Why don't we start, May? Why don't you take us through some of the polling and where that fits in Anglicare's broader mission, and then we'll go from there and see if people have some questions and just let the conversation unfold organically. So
Great.
Take it away, May.
Thank you. Sounds good. Firstly, thanks so much for having me. And secondly, a boring logistical thing, which is that for reasons, my camera is up there, but my screen is actually down here. So I'm going to try really hard to make actual eye contact with the camera, but it's very tempting to also look at the screen. So I'll do what I can.
We keep things fairly casual here, so just don't worry about it too much. Sure. Take it easy.
Thanks. As Austin sort of touched on, we released a report last month, which saw us become the first major charity in Australia to call for a basic income, or to back a basic income, I should say. And the genesis for this idea really came last year in 2020, where our team here in Canberra, our policy and advocacy and research team, got together and did some kind of blue sky planning with someone external. And the point of that was really just for us all to think about what is the advocacy area, what is the issue that we think would make the biggest impact for the people who we work with, what would do the most good. And we all sort of went off and thought about it separately, and each of us individually thought it's really important that everybody has an income above the poverty line. It's going to be the most important and impactful thing in every area that we work in. Obviously, we work in emergency relief and financial counselling and a lot of areas that are directly affected by poverty, but we work in a lot of other areas as well, like aged care, and there are a lot of issues with people not aging well and not aging healthily and being quite frail when they get to aged care, and a lot of that is to do with income. We work in out-of-home care. It's one of our big areas, and absolutely the thing that would make the biggest impact to families and keeping families together and keeping children safe is really about families having the income that they need to live above the poverty line. So every single one of us working across every different area just kind of had this same realization. And so initially I told Austin, and I had a chat last week, and I was actually telling him that we initially thought that we wanted to advocate for a universal basic income, and I know that that's predominantly the area of interest for this group. But we're a whole network. We're not just a little office in Canberra. And so when we started talking to our whole network and, where they wanted to be and what was acceptable to them, where we kind of got to was not so much a universal basic income, although that's not necessarily off the table, but just a basic income that leaves people with enough of an income above the poverty line. So that could be achieved through a universal basic income. It could also be achieved through something like a livable income guarantee. We aren't wedded to the model. The most important thing to us is just that everybody gets an income above the poverty line. And so from there, we kind of set out to design a report that really focused on the benefits of a basic income. Again, this was one of the things that Austin and I touched on in our conversation last week. A lot of progressive policy ideas, the proponents for them lead with the costs, and I really think that gets you into a world of pain. And that's not to say that we should be dishonest about the costs, but I think we need to do the work of persuasion first, and I think then you can go off and make the political choices that you need to make about which model and what's the cost. So the real aim of the study is to look at how would a basic income change the way people use their time. Should I should I keep going or should I wait a little while?
Well, Austin has obviously dropped out, and the recording has stopped. I think maybe wait until he gets back and can start the recording again.
Cool.
He needs a better connection wherever he is.
I really like your background, George. Are you on a holiday somewhere?
I'm just chilling in the mountains.
Oh,
You know,
nice one.
I just thought I'd jump in the gym. Oh, let's go back.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. I paused a little bit there, Austin. So I'll try and remember where I was, and I'll restart.
I'm very sorry. I
that's
lost
okay.
my internet connection there right at the crucial moment. The Australian internet NBN let me down. I'm one house past where the NBN finishes. So
Oh.
I live on the other side of the digital divide. I'm sorry we lost you for a second there. Had you finished? Had you moved on to questions already? Did I interrupt?
No, I was actually just about to talk about what we found, what people told us about how they would change the way they would use their time. I think I'll talk about that and then I'll stop for a breath because I'm conscious of the fact that I've been talking for a while.
Yeah, before you jump back in, what people can do is just use the raise hand function on Zoom. And I'll try and go around to people in the order that they raise hands, and you can put your questions directly to Maiy. So people can start doing that now if they want.
Yeah. So basically, what we found was that there would be a lot of individual benefits, community benefits, and just society-wide pro-social benefits to a basic income. So about 2 in 5 people, so 38% of the respondents, told us they would use a basic income to secure their finances, which isn't surprising, especially considering the breakdown of who was most likely to say that. So the people who were the most likely to use it to pay down debt and things like that were the people who weren't in full-time work and also the people with dependent children. So that's, a really good outcome. There's a lot of Australians who don't have more than $500 in the bank, and that creates problems for a whole lot of reasons. About 1 in 4 wanted to spend more time volunteering, and that's also a really good outcome. Right now, there's a lot of Australians who volunteer. It's about 8 million people who volunteer formally. So Australia's got a really high rate of it, but the people who do it are mostly people on high incomes. So, giving people, it's not just about giving organisations the benefit of having volunteers. It's also just about giving people the opportunity to do something that's meaningful to them. And I think we all know that that's not necessarily paid work. 1 in 4, so 22% again, would spend more time caring, so taking on some informal caring responsibilities for friends and family. And that's going to be really important as population ages and various other things happen. Caring is getting harder and harder because demands on people's time and money are getting kind of more and more pronounced, so that we are projecting a shortage in carers. So that's another really positive thing. And about 1 in 5 people would invest in their own skills and education. And the people who were the most likely to say that were people who weren't in full-time work. So, we've inferred from that people in casual work basically just want to shore up their skills and maybe get into a more secure industry. We actually had a range of things, but I'm just thinking of the ones that are the most significant. But the last one that I would say is the most significant is that about 10% of people said they would reduce their paid work hours. That's beneficial it's beneficial for them if that's what they want to do. But there's also a whole lot of people who want to work more and are working insecurely. So, a basic income, we think, could create a bit of space for people to do that. So I'll leave it there, and I think that might be a good place for us to start having more of a discussion. If anyone wants to ask questions.
No one's put their hand up yet. This is always what happens. No one wants to be first. Oh, Josh has got his hand up. Let's go to Josh.
I'll jump in.
It won't stop now.
Maybe
Now that they've started, they'll pile on top of each other. You wait and see. Go ahead, Josh.
This is maybe a silly question, but is the report public? I haven't seen it in my circles.
Yes, I will send you a link to it in the chat right now. Actually, that's a good point. So this is just the media release, which is the overview of the findings, but there's the link to the actual report in there.
And if people are watching this on YouTube and don't have access to the chat or watching at a later date, what should they Google to find it? They can
just go to anglicare.asn.au and and then go to news, and it's like the first news item. Yeah.
Okay. So the one thing that I didn't hear you mention much was the idea of jobs or employment. Was there any impulse within Anglicare to push a job creation program or a job guarantee? And was that considered as an alternative to focusing on the outcome of incomes more generally? Because there has been a tradition in the sort of the charity sector that Anglicare comes from of sometimes sort of, trying to say who are the deserving poor, who are the undeserving poor, can we get people back into the workforce as a primary goal, and a fear of that giving people money without conditions would actually hinder their return to the workforce. Was any of that attitude, was that something that you discussed internally, or that you come across from people in your sector rather?
We did start calling for a jobs guarantee. We first made that call back in 2018, but we made that call actually at around the same time that we started flirting with the basic income. So we put out this other report once every year called the Jobs Availability Snapshot, and it looks at how many entry-level jobs are available. So those are jobs that don't require advanced skills or a lot of experience. I won't get diverted by that. That's something we do once a year, and we make a set of recommendations in that snapshot every year. And back in 2018, we called for both a jobs guarantee and also a trial of a basic income. So we hadn't kind of fully committed to it back then, but that was when we first sort of started flirting with it. For us, a jobs guarantee isn't something that you do instead of a basic income. They're there to achieve different things, So a basic income is really about poverty reduction, lifting people out of poverty. Jobs guarantee is just really giving everyone who wants to work the opportunity to do it. And I mean, I think that in Australia, a large part of civil society has always organised itself around a particular model of work. And I think one of the things that has probably been pretty harmful to a lot of people over time, people who can't work or have difficulty working or whatever, have other responsibilities, caring responsibilities, is that poverty reduction in Australia is always linked to work. And that's just not working for, the 3.4 million Australians who live in poverty. It's actually a really enormous number. So some of them already work is the other thing. So, a job isn't necessarily the answer to poverty. I think we've accepted that for a long time.
Yeah. Obviously, a lot of people are going to hear that, that there are people who are working in there in poverty, and also then clearly what we should be focusing on is wages. Did you guys discuss that? What do you guys see the basic income? People have different, you can speak for yourself as well as the organization, of course. People sometimes say, well, basic income would be a kind of wage subsidy and it would allow employers to get away with paying lower wages. Some basic income advocates actually say, yes, that's a good thing and that's why we should do it. other basic income advocates say no, and this is the camp that I fall into, it'll actually force up wages because you'll give people more bargaining power. Where do you guys come down on all of this, or you personally?
I think a lot of the things that we've tried to do to put upwards pressure on wages don't really work, and they're incompatible with a lot of other economic goals. And we just see that in society, right? I mean, I think for us, the key thing is focusing on the outcome, and the outcome is getting everybody an income above the poverty line. And so whatever model we go for needs to achieve that goal. And so if it supplements someone's income that isn't getting them above the poverty line, as far as we're concerned, that's a good thing. That's better than that person, living in poverty. And I mean, I think separately to the Anglicare Australia work, this idea that people should work full time 5 days a week, it is a really, really recent idea. So for most of human society, work was seen as it was kind of seen as this thing that you didn't really do, or you outsourced it to people who weren't really people, like slaves or whatever, or you did it as quickly as you could, so agricultural work was sort of done at certain times of the year, and you kind of just got it out of the way so that you could live your real life. It's really been in kind of the last 300 or 400 years that we've been attached to this model of full-time work. So I mean, I think a lot of those perspectives, they come from this idea that the best thing for a person is just to work full-time. And I just don't.
And you could even
I just haven't heard any persuasive argument for why that needs to be the thing that determines whether someone lives in poverty or not. And
it also used to be that there would be one full-time worker per household and one person, and that was obviously a gendered divide of roles, and maybe we didn't want it to be so gendered. But the way we've resolved that is now having both members of the household work, and in fact, basically, you need both members of the household to be working full time, especially if you're the lower end of the income spectrum, to keep up with the cost of living and the cost of housing and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So and that's even only in the last couple of generations that it's gone from being one member of the household working full time to both. And there's been that extra squeeze. And why wasn't it the case that, when we balanced out the gender roles, that implied, men working fewer hours outside the home and spending more time in care? Why did it just become women getting to be promoted to the status of men by getting to work outside the home more?
I think that's an excellent point, but I think it also goes to the way work has just colonized every aspect of our life, and kind of also colonized much of civil society. That, like, the main measure of the progress of the feminist movement it's all measured by women's success in the workforce. And that's, I don't want to downplay that is really really important, but kind of going back to what you said, we did another piece of research back in 2018 called The Real Story, and it was kind of a much more comprehensive study of people's attitudes towards poverty and welfare. And one of the components to it was kind of an ethnography of other research. And one of the things that was really interesting and a bit sad in that is actually that wages have been stagnant in Australia for a really, really long time. We're feeling the impact of it now because everybody is at the absolute ceiling of how much they can work. What's gone up in the last several decades is household incomes, not actual wages. And so people are actually purchasing their wages with more labor. That's what's happened over the last kind of 30 years. People are just working more, and there are more working people in every household, and they need to do that just to, as you say, Austin, just to keep up with the cost of basics, the cost of basic things,
especially housing.
Housing, transport, education, health. The cost of all these things that we actually need are going up. The cost of a whole lot of other things are going down, but the things that we actually need to survive, those costs are actually going up all the time.
Yeah. There's an interesting distinction there between inflation and the cost of living we could come back to, but Stephen Gale's got his hands up. Let's go to Stephen and get his question in, and then Douglas will come to you after May's had a chance to answer Stephen.
I was just wondering, do you think the Australian public thinks we can actually solve poverty? Because sometimes it feels like an idealistic kind of goal, and they just kind of go, yeah, it'd be nice, but I don't think we can do it, so let's not even commit to anything big to do about it. So what is your sense of the feeling for that?
Australians are absolutely committed to ending poverty, and there's a component to the research which shows that. So 77% of people want everyone to have an income above the poverty line. But I think what I guess I've been reflecting on in the last kind of week or so since I've kind of started talking to Austin actually is, it is quite difficult to get a kind of consensus on how to do that. I mean, I hope that gets easier after last year, because the simple and obvious solution of just giving people an income above the poverty line, like just paying them, worked. It kind of all but eradicated poverty in Australia for, several months. And, there's still research ongoing, about the positive impacts that's had on people's health and, well-being. And I mean, I think it's the obvious solution. I believe that support for a basic income is going up, and I hope that the experience that we had last year, where we simply just paid, virtually everybody had access to an income above the poverty line,
but that was
just a simple and obvious way.
It was very temporary. It was in a crisis. It cost a lot of money, etc.
But is it a bit like during the Second World War, women got to work in factories, and then afterwards women got to keep working in factories even though the emergency passed, right? The idea was that I'll go home, but these changes become permanent, these emergency changes.
I think the issue is that the crisis really hasn't passed. Obviously the COVID crisis hasn't passed, but I mean the poverty crisis continues to exist and continues to worsen. So I mean, I think the issue is how many people need to be exposed to it for it to make an impact. Although, having said that, one of the things that's really interesting is when we ask that question, how many people, should everyone have an income above the poverty line? The people who were the least likely to support it were the people who were earning low incomes, and people earning high incomes and people who were older were actually the most likely to support it, which suggests that lived experience actually isn't that important. I used to sort of think, when something becomes a real crisis, or it hits a real tipping point in society, that's when you see change. But I think the results sort of challenge that. I don't quite know what it means, but perhaps it just means that people who are having lived experiences of hardship are internalizing some of those negative stereotypes. But
what you
said that was a real ramble. Sorry about that. I just realized that was kind of
you also said there were people who are earning low income. So is it people who are on low income wages, perhaps, who are actually working for minimum wage or whatever, saying that I'm not so keen on somebody else getting $500 a week for no work when I'm getting $700 a week for a full-time job, right? Where so that people, is it possible that people on the lower end, there's a little bit of downwards envy going on there as well?
Possibly. I think it is a bit broader than that. Again, when we did our bigger study in 2018 of people's attitudes, we surveyed people in a much more comprehensive way. We asked a range of kind of value statements, things like people who live in poverty are just like me. Anyone can find themselves in poverty through no fault of their own. These types of questions, and the people who had their own recent experiences of hardship gave the least sympathetic answers in general. So not just in this survey, but in that kind of much broader one. So I think there might be some negative self-stereotyping. There might be this sense that, well, I'm willing to work hard, but if you believe kind of narratives about people who are in poverty and why they're in poverty, and then you look at yourself and you think, well, that's not me. You think, well, maybe all these other people are actually giving the rest of us a bad name. It's really hard.
There is a lots of unemployment in India. Lots of engineers are unemployed. What is the...
Sorry, that was someone just jumping in out of turn, so I've muted them. But anyhow, do you want to wrap up there and we'll move to Douglas?
Yeah.
Because he's been waiting for a little while to get. Yeah.
Okay, well, I guess I'll go then.
Yeah, thank you, Douglas.
Just a couple of things. I wanted to speak to what you were saying earlier. I think you're spot on about households. Also,
you are talking about
running up credit card debt. And things like that as well. But I thought I might quote Eva Cox, which I had to write this down. She said this just a week ago in support of UBI. Feminism is not about getting women to do what men do. That's from Eva Cox. And I just thought that kind of speaks to what you were saying earlier. We all need freedom. So I suppose that's the core point. The other issue is that it seems that some people have tried to have drawn into doubt the success of this in support of UBI. Some have said that because the direct question didn't have the word UBI in it, that it isn't necessarily support for UBI. What can you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't, I'm totally open to that. We actually made some changes, actually, when we looked back on it, we didn't make as many inferences as I kind of thought we had, but we made some modest changes to the report last week. I'm totally open to that. I think what we can see is that people are committed to reducing poverty, and we need to find a means to that end and build consensus for what I think is the most obvious idea. Is there like this huge barrage of support for UBI that I hoped and thought there was? No, I don't. Well, that's unclear. Like I agree that we haven't established that, or we don't know that. I do think that we are seeing support grow. I thought, the YouGov poll that came out last year, that actually came out right as we were thinking of doing something ourselves, and I think that was a really encouraging result. I can tell you just super anecdotally, the report has been really well received, and not everything that we do is well received. We did a report a few years ago called The Cost of Privilege, which was about how much more Australia spends keeping wealthy people wealthy than it actually spends supporting people who genuinely, need help. And that we got so much backlash for that, I don't mean in the media, although we got a bit of backlash in the media, but we just got so many people contacting us, and we actually haven't had that with UBI. I think because it's not about basic income isn't about taking anything away from anybody. Obviously, if we're going to have a basic income at some point, we'll need to have a conversation about tax and transfer and, you know, all of that. It wouldn't really make sense to keep a lot of the other settings that we have in place and then bring in a UBI or bring in a basic income, I should say. You know, but I think people heard the focus of the report, which is really about how it would change people's lives, and thought about the poverty reduction aspects of it. And I think it's been really, it's been one of the most positively received things that I've worked on from that front. There just haven't been the angry emails from people going, what is that ridiculous woman, you know, saying on the ABC, our boss, Casey Chambers, has this sort of mop of blonde curly hair. And so we always get this, what was that, you know, blonde woman saying on we've had absolutely none of that for this one. You know, so I think that is an anecdote. I don't want to overstate what that means, but yeah, I think there's a real community building around basic income. The people who are passionate about it are really passionate, and I think that bodes well for building support. There isn't that level of passion for a lot of other ideas that exist.
We'll go to Bernice in just a second. I'll just get start you to unmute Bernice. But while we're on that, I was actually one of the people who raised the issue of, you know, is this a support for a basic income, or is it just support for a policy? Is it a support for a policy, or is it support for an outcome? And making that distinction. And, you know, so if it had been more closely worded with more similar in wording to the YouGov poll, we would have known a bit more about about the extent to which public opinion is shifting. What we've got at the moment is, we can probably say that, you know, we had the 58% support in that poll last year, and here we can't be sure how much of the difference comes from the difference in the question and how much represents a shift in public opinion. Of course, the thing is, public opinion isn't actually there until you go looking for it with a particular question. And for a lot of people, you know, when I made this issue, the ABC, the journalists at the ABC were sort of saying, well, you know, what's the difference if we're guaranteeing an income to, if we're saying that everyone should have an income above the poverty line, what's the difference between that and support for a basic income? And, you know, there's something to that, but of course, one of the things that basic income advocates are about is that there's something special about the unconditionality of a basic income, that it doesn't check. And you know, that's the thing you're saying, that when you do these reports about, well, actually we're giving a fair amount of income support to the middle class and upper class. That's actually one of the features of basic income, I would say, is that it goes to those people, and that makes it perhaps harder to take away, which I know is something part of your thinking too. Did you want to comment on that before we go to Bernice, or should we just jump straight to her question?
I will quickly. I can see we still have a bit of time, so
we've got ages, so take your time. So that you can go get down all the tangents and talk through all the curly bits in this discussion group. That's the point.
I don't mean to keep harking back to our 2018 research on attitudes, but that really, in many ways, it was the precursor to what we've done here. And one of the things that we looked at is what are the most popular aspects of the social security system in Australia. And the most popular aspects are the most universal, and the least popular aspects are the ones that are the most targeted. So Medicare and the age pension, and this is not, you know, what we found is not in any way unique. You know, I think virtually every survey of attitudes towards social security in Australia finds the same thing. The pension and Medicare are consistently the most popular aspects of the social security system in Australia, and they are also the most universal. Medicare rebates go to everybody, regardless of what income you're on. You can get a rebate for going to see a doctor or getting quite limited, actually, health services, but nevertheless, the rebates themselves are totally universal. And the age pension is fairly universal. It's becoming less universal, but, you'd have to be pretty wealthy not to get at least a part pension. And the least popular aspects are the most targeted, and they become less popular over time, when we look at surveys conducted in Australia over time, the more targeted they become. And I mean, I think there's a debate to be had. I've spoken to this about people, spoken about this to people who say to me, well, they're being targeted because they're unpopular, but I don't agree with that. I do think that when you reduce the number and the amount of power and the amount of profile that a constituency gets, their issues are just going to become less popular. And so I think we do see in Australia again and again, things like family tax benefits are also a really good example. Once you start giving things to middle class people, it becomes a lot harder to tamper with them, and it becomes a lot harder to reduce them and take them away. And so that was really when we first started thinking about a basic income. So I totally agree with that, Austin.
Bernice.
Thank you. I want to go back to something that was spoken about earlier, which is basically saying that the UBI is gaining more and more popularity. And it's like, what I keep seeing is that what people want and what we get are not necessarily the same thing. They're different things. So my question is around the politics of getting the UBI into Australia. I mean, last year the government was very good at providing the support when everybody was sort of impacted by the lockdowns. But this year, despite the fact that, well, I'm in Melbourne, so I don't know if everybody's the case, but I know a lot of people who haven't been able to work, and for the first sort of half of the year, weren't really getting any support from the government. It was like they were recalcitrant. They didn't want to go on about it. Scott Morrison at the moment is saying, right, come the end of the year, come hell or high water, there's going to be no more support. So they're becoming, I don't know, recalcitrant. They don't want it quite so much. So they keep talking about the budget deficit and we can't maintain it and this, that, and the other, which my head turns around and goes, we're a country that can more than comfortably provide for our people. So what do you mean we can't maintain this? So my questions, so just to sort of shrink it all down, is the people might want it, but if the government turns around and says, no, not really, not interested, how do we bridge that divide? Or is this too early a question for that?
I don't have definitive answers to that, but I have two general kind of ideas. One of them is to do with really framing a basic income in terms of its benefits and what it can do. I touched on this before, that there's so many things out there at the moment, and they're all really exciting, kind of modeling what a basic income would cost. And, because we're all policy wonks, we love that kind of thing. But I don't really think that's how you persuade. And I think at the last election, I was just struck by how many the propensity that the opposition had to lead with the costs of its ideas instead of talking about the benefits. One of the things that we had been really pushing them to do was make this really big investment in social and affordable housing, not just for people at the, who'd been on waiting lists for years and years, but just not, fairly middle class people as well. And they actually did that. They made this commitment to get 300,000 new affordable rentals, but they didn't talk about it, and they spent the entire time talking about how they were going to fund it. So I mean, I think that tells us something about how we persuade people, or whether we even try to persuade people. I mean, I think we assume that from the outset that cost is going to be the number one barrier that people have to something. But I think once they're persuaded, you can then go in and have a conversation about the NDIS is a really good example. The argument was won, and then we went off and talked about the cost, and that actually, took longer to work out, and arguably we're still,
So
NDIS never had a kind of price tag attached to it in the public debate. So I mean, I think that's instructive for us. I think just lead with the benefits. But sorry, I have one other thing to say, but I can see that you want to say something too. Yeah.
No, I'm just, I suppose for me, you're saying lead with the benefits, and I'm going, that's all well. From the research that you've done, it would appear that the grand majority of Australians are going, yes, let's go ahead with this. My question is a little bit more on not convincing the Australians so much as convincing the political juggernaut around this. And that may not be your area of expertise, and if that's the case, my apologies. But it's just, I'm going, so we're saying most people want this good, how do we make it happen?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that they're unrelated. Again, you see tons of people going off and doing polling and things saying that X many Australians agree with their idea. There's no shortage of that, but that doesn't mean that they really care about something. I mean, I've got a friend who works on like this campaign to get asbestos removed, do all this work to remove asbestos from workplaces in developing countries. And they've done all the research and everyone loves it. And yep, it's, well, they like it and they say agree. They love it is probably a bit strong. But the issue is they don't really care about it. And I mean, I think issues become vote-changing issues and therefore important to politicians when people start to not just agree with them, but actually really care about them. Okay. And I do think that this thing is affordable, it might be a way to get someone to agree with you, but it's not a way to get someone to really care about what you're saying. I think that the other thing I was going to touch on, and I'm sorry to keep raising the 2018 piece, but as I said, in many ways it was the precursor to this report. One of the things that we looked at in our literature review for that piece was this really great study out of the, I want to say London School of Economics. It might have been University College London, by someone called Tom O'Grady. And he looked at when did social security and benefits start to become unpopular in Britain. And he looked at the British Survey of Social Attitudes, and it showed that throughout the 80s and early 90s, when benefit system was under kind of constant attack from the Tories, actually they didn't succeed in implementing a lot of their agenda, and a lot of the things that they were trying to do weren't very popular. It's towards social security in Britain, he found, was the mid-90s. And he did this speech analysis looking at how parliamentarians, he looked at transcripts of speeches in Parliament. What changed at that time was how Labor started speaking about benefits. And so the issue was contested, and then there was a consensus. And it was that he infers, I don't think there's a way to test it 100%, but it was that consensus that Labor brought into that took it from being an idea that was kind of still contested in the community, that welfare had to be conditional, that people were people weren't entitled to unconditional benefits if they needed help, or whatever. Once Labor conceded that point, people really did start to change their minds. I've tried to find ways to replicate that in Australia, but I think what it shows is we shouldn't we shouldn't concede these things or treat them as foregone or truths, or kind of argue from a place that assumes that people don't agree with us, would be my conclusion.
I think I feel like that's all very true, but what Bernice is saying is also very true, that sometimes we have a strong consensus when there is a consensus on in the population, and then there's an opposite consensus amongst the sort of elite decision makers. And one of the things that happens is that an idea will be popular, but its popularity will become invisible. So it'll be treated, basic income is a great example of that, because we find this polling that shows it's a fairly popular mainstream idea. Actually, if mainstream means most people are into it, it's quite mainstream, but then it doesn't get anywhere near it's treated as a fringe issue sort of by default in media and politics, and there's a lot of really interesting questions, I think, about why that's the case, and how and who gets to decide what even gets talked about. But I'm conscious of getting to Michael and Douglas, who've had their hands up for a while as well, unless if you wanted to have some final thoughts on that topic though, or
I'm sure we can come back to that later. Actually, I am conscious that people have had their hand up for a while.
Michael, you're muted. Michael, hold on a sec. You can unmute yourself. I'm asking you to unmute.
Yep, no, I've unmuted. Thanks, Austin. Yeah, I'm really interested, May, in what you said very early on about the fact that the people who are actually had suffered hardship themselves struggled with this whole idea of giving people money. But I wonder, is that still possible because they would not see themselves being in receipt of that? Or is it, in other words, that they see, well, I've struggled through, I've made it, blow you, you're not getting anything. But if they were to get it as well, and that was clearer in their understanding, would that be something, do you think, could help shift their perception? Or there's, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's possible. I mean, I think another possibility that could explain, and this is all kind of speculation. We say, we say in this report and in the one we did in 2018 that it's really difficult to understand the factors at play there when people who are on lower incomes or people who've had recent experiences of hardship give these types of responses. But one of them is just that when you're in survival mode, you're really only thinking about yourself, and you're primed to do that. And that's not being selfish. It's literally just because you need to survive. So that's another possibility, if we could conduct our own natural experiment, about, I mean, if we got a basic income, it would be really interesting to see how having it would actually change the way people think and how they relate to each other. And I think that would be really interesting. But so I mean, I suspect that part of people's attitudes might also just be a function of the fact that they're trying to survive, and that gives them less space to think compassionately about others.
So just on that point, May, about what would it be like if people had it, have you had discussions about, starting really at a very low level and then gradually increasing it? Has that been part of your consideration?
Yeah, so one of the models, one of the people who we've done a bit of work with on this is Troy Henderson from the University of Sydney. So we've done a bit of joint media with him, and I wrote a joint op-ed with him in the Canberra Times this week. And one of the things that he calls for is a livable income guarantee, which is a more modest, more affordable way to kind of start this. So
I think though that you're talking about a different kind of ramping there. See,
right?
What Michael is discussing is a payment that's less than that's a smaller amount but goes to everybody, rather than rather than bringing it in by targeting some people, you bring it in by not targeting and just by having a lower amount. So you might, and you'd keep existing payments in place for a little while as you sort of ramp this thing up, and that may have that different effect of everybody having it.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. That's not one that we canvass. It's not one to be honest, it's not one I'd thought about until now. But I think that's possibly a really good idea. I mean, as I'm sure many of you know, being really because I know you're all interested in this. Alaska has that kind of modest dividend from its oil and gas industry, and it's super popular. I wonder if a politician in Alaska proposed to double it. I'm sure that would be exceedingly popular.
They actually did that, and they got in. So a Republican governor, I think, decided they would double the amount of money being paid, and they got in on a landslide. But then they had to say, well, now how are we going to pay for it? There's been all sorts of problems. But could I just pick up one more point and then I'll shut up? You asked about how do we make it happen, and Bernice did too. And I think you made a really good point about getting people to care. And to get people to care, you need to be able to sell the message. And to sell the message, you need to be on social media, on TV, radio, everything. And that costs a huge amount of money. And it's usually those sort of messages are either funded by unions or big business or political parties. But I'm just wondering, we've got a couple of billionaires now from Atlassian who have some sort of social conscience. Mike Cannon-Brookes and Scott Farquhar, whether we ought to be trying to talk to these guys saying, listen, would they be prepared to fund a campaign that's apolitical, to simply show what you were talking about, Maiy, how this might affect real people, right, across the board? Because I think it's also the perfect time because lots of people have suddenly found themselves without an income. And the message really is, just because that's happened to everybody all at once, the circumstances are just as dire and just as fickle for when it happens to us one by one. And that we can lose our job because, the bosses, the company's lost sales, or it's moving interstate, or my car's broken down and I can't afford to get. I mean, there's literally 1,000 reasons why individual people suddenly find themselves in poverty, or
yes, but Michael,
wife's being kicked out.
But Michael, then we get ourselves in the position of, well, what about the people who didn't lose a job through no fault of their own? They lost their job because they deserved it. Do they deserve? To therefore be punished?
But the thing is that if we are going to say that what's by far the greatest good, right? There are some people who are going to be slackers. There are some people who, play up, but they are a tiny, tiny percentage. And let us, I think, as Maiy said, let us make the message about what is going to affect absolutely the greatest majority of people. And if other people want to pick up and attack it, then, like Maiy was saying before, in terms of the history in the UK about that change in thinking, well, we don't accept that. We just push back and say that's not a reason why we shouldn't provide this, because it's such a small number of people who are in that category. Anyway, I'll shut up now. Thank you for my turn.
Maiy, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be great. I would be absolutely delighted to see, a campaign for basic income that leads with shared values instead of costs. I think that would be amazing. So I think that would be a good way to build support.
Yeah. So could the charities amongst themselves put a little bit of money in to demonstrate they've got skin in the game, but really to go to these billionaires and really put the hard word on them, right? I mean, you look at the amount of money that Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and others are putting up. There is this sort of mindset, not amongst them all, I admit, but amongst that class of people now who feel maybe there is something they can do to give back. And I mean, certainly Atlassian is trying to do the greenest building that is in terms of their new construction, and so they are of that mindset. And that it would be great maybe outside this meeting to talk with you, Maiy, about how we might be able to progress that. I've got a couple of contacts in Atlassian, but not at the level of Mike Cannon-Brookes and Scott.
And if anybody else is interested in that kind of campaigning, they can join the Basic Income Action Group, which I'm sure Josh will talk about a bit more when we get to him. But let's go to Douglas.
Hey, yeah, no, interesting point, Michael, about bringing on Michael Cannon-Brookes. I, from what I can tell, he's good mates with Elon Musk, so there might be a bit of a, but I think that's a bit of a double-edged sword, because me personally, I want to tax the ultra wealthy if I fund a UBI. So I'd have the goal of taxing him until he's no longer a billionaire.
Well, so you and I would differ about that, so I'm happy talking to him.
So anyway, back to my real reason for putting my hand up is that to speak to Bernice's question about how on earth are we going to get this done politically? I was part of, okay, so let's rule out the LNP, because even if we did convince them, they'd do a hash of it and do fiber to the node or something. But in the Labor Party, I tried to promote it, and to no avail. They seem to be stuck in their ways. And the analysis I've come to, because I'm very keen on this, I'm trying to figure out why they're so stuck in their ways, is because they only have to be slightly better than the Liberal National Party. And it's against their best interests to win an election to be anything but that. So I respect their stance, I get it. In order to make a difference, you have to move the political window. And this is where I get to trying to sell my political party. And there's double reasons for this. Recently they passed a law which meant the minimum number of members for a political party that doesn't have anyone elected is, it used to be 500 members. Now it's been changed to 1,500 members. The party I'm in, which is the Australian Progressives, have UBI unequivocally on their platform. There are other parties that do too, and it wouldn't be fair unless I mentioned them as well. It seems the Science Party is behind it. The Pirate Party have a version of BI, which is similar to Troy Henderson's. And I think that, I know that Tim Hollow is trying to promote it in the Greens.
We've had the Pirate Party on, Alex Jago from the Pirate Party, to discuss their negative income tax plan. I believe that was our last meeting before this one a month ago.
So in any case, if you are struggling to wonder how you can help in this, I would strongly recommend helping and joining one of these parties, especially mine, because we've only got 3 months to make sure we have 1,500 members. And they make us do an audit, which is incredibly labor intensive for people who aren't paid to do any of this. So the more members we can get, the better. So if you're looking for a way to promote UBI, join at least one of these minor parties. I fear, as much as I respect the Labor Party and the members in it, there doesn't seem politically anyway within the party to actually move the Overton window. That's my 5 cents.
Yeah, I do also think that it's not just a question of they only need to be slightly better than the Liberals. I do think there are a lot of people in Labor who have a genuine ideological problem with basic income, for the same reason that we've found that a lot of folks in the union movement have a problem with it, which is that they are really attached to a certain model of work. We were really excited last year when the United Workers Union came out in favour of a basic income, and they're the first big union do that. And they're a union that's very relevant to Anglicare Australia. They represent aged care and a few relevant industries to us. And they're doing some interesting things in general, actually. But what we're talking about, we've sort of written to a bunch of Labor MPs, and we're kind of trying to identify whether there could be someone who might be a champion for it. But we're also, we're sort of thinking that it would be good to try and have a dialogue with the unions as well, because that could be a good way to reach folks in Labor. I think the other thing is that in that sort of crowd, that's where you see the jobs guarantee being pitted against the basic income. There's actually no reason. There's absolutely no reason for a jobs guarantee to be incompatible with the basic income. And in fact, the United Workers Union support both.
I have a quick follow-up question that just occurred to me. Emma Watson, who's the head of the Per Capita Institute, it seems that her one major holdout argument against a universal basic income is the fear of the complete erosion of necessary targeted welfare, such as disability payments. I mean, I've thought about this bit, and you can't disprove something like that unless you try a UBI. But I get the reservation. There is a distinct risk because you reduce its necessity and therefore it has a higher chance of erosion, like we see with so many other targeted policies. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a good point. And to be honest, one I hadn't put a huge amount of thought into. I think the thing that we've always said is that the poverty line is actually different for different people. The Henderson poverty line, which is the one that we use, if you look at it, there's 12 bloody different poverty, whether you're, depending on how many children you have and whether you're working or not working. One of the things I find really baffling is that there's two poverty lines. There's one poverty line for people who are working and another poverty line for people who aren't working. And if you aren't working, the poverty line is lower. So I'll never really understand why that is, but I digress completely. It also depends on how much you spend on housing. The poverty line, the Henderson poverty line, assumes that you're only spending 30% of your income on housing, which, as we all know, is just not the reality in Australia. So for us, it's really about how much money do you have left after you've spent what you need to spend to be housed. So for us, it's really, again, about the focus on the outcome. And it's not just folks with disabilities. All kinds of other people might need to be paid in a different way for them to achieve an income above the poverty line. I don't definitively know how to satisfy the concerns of someone like Emma. I suspect that there are just certain people who are, I think, because of their connection to Labor and organising themselves around work, are just never going to come on board with a basic income. But I think it is absolutely possible to guarantee that everybody has what they need to live a proper, decent, comfortable life. And I think for us, that's just what the focus has to be on, sticking with the outcome and not getting distracted by all of these kind of side arguments about the process and the model. Because I think if you're committed to the outcome, you can design a process that works.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
There's 4 people with their hands up, which is great. But we're probably going to get towards the end of the meeting by the time we move through those 4 people. Josh, I think you've had your hand up the longest, so we're going to go to you, and then we're going to go to Bernice, and then we're going to go Daniela, and then Michael. Just let everyone know that's my best remembrance of the order that we went through. So, but maybe we'll get a chance to respond between each of them. Josh, go ahead.
I have a question. I was going to read out his question from the chat because he says his microphone's not working, which adds another person to the queue. So Austin, what do you think? Should we do that?
So
or-
you have a question and you want to read out Zane's question.
I was going to. I feel like it's a bit unfair. If you can't speak.
Let's do Zane's question first, and then we'll do yours. Okay? Can you read out Zane's question for him? Thank you.
Yep. He says, it was mentioned around the start that a job isn't necessarily the answer to poverty. I was wondering what would be the answer to poverty if there is one.
Yeah, I mean, my strong, this is like my personal non-Anglicare opinion, but I think part of the idea of why basic income is attractive is I think part of the solution to poverty is actually decoupling poverty from work. You know, everyone deserves to live a life free of poverty, you know, regardless of whether they can work or want to work full time, or whether there's something else that they want to do, you know, that's creative but still a contribution. You know, I mean, I think.
Can I just jump in there?
I think for me, it's like the self-evident reality, because I'm here, that I think a basic income is the answer, you know, is the answer to poverty. But sorry, Austin, I didn't mean to.
I just like to also ask the question, and people say, well, you know, people might be contributing in some other way. It's like, well, let's assume for a second that someone's not. Let's assume that there's someone who really is just a terrible person. They're really lazy. They're really selfish. They don't care about anybody but themselves. They're not going to do any work unless we make them. So what's the plan then? Right? Is the plan that where you know that person should be, you know, starved to death? You know, it's just kind of a bit insane, really. Like, even if they're this antisocial, nasty person, it's still the easiest thing for us to do as a society is to keep them out of poverty and off the street and sort of out of everybody's way.
I think,
you know?
I think it's in absolutely everybody's best interests to stop anybody from living in poverty. I mean, the other thing is that it's like, oh, what about the selfish, you know, narcissists who leech off everybody else? Hate to break it to you, but those people exist in the workforce as well. You know, some of them are incredibly senior powerful people, you know, and we're apparently fine with them not living in poverty. So I think you know, I don't think anybody I don't think anybody should you know, should live in poverty.
Josh, you had your own question as well before we go to Bernice.
Yeah, I just want to say I'm loving everything you're saying, Maiy. Keep it up. So I'm reading here, Anglicare Australia is the first major charity to support a basic income.
Yes.
Fantastic. I'm wondering, what do you see as the next steps from here for Anglicare?
Yeah, I mean, we've been thinking about that because it's been so well received, and we don't want to you know, we don't want to lose momentum. I think it's a really big challenge to try and get other civil society organizations. I mentioned unions, but I mean other charities. That's also a bit of a bit of a battle. Civil society in Australia is pretty conservative. You know, in other parts of the world, civil society is kind of on the front line of moving debates in really radical kind of directions, but here it's a little bit timid, and I don't really know what the answer to that is. But I think I'll say that for us, we're totally committed to really trying to push the sector in this direction. Basic income, but also just less conditional support. You know, one of the things that we've been talking about for a long time is big parts of the sector just don't challenge the idea of conditional support. So never mind everybody supports that, but nobody challenges this idea that you need to engage in this ridiculous theatre of nonsense activities just to be eligible for a payment, even though everybody agrees that none of those things actually achieve anything, and they're kind of just a bit of a waste of time and money. So I mean, I think all I can say about that is really just that we're committed to using the platform that we have to try and bring other organisations on board. One of our members is the Brotherhood of St. Lawrence. They're a part of the Anglicare network, and they have been doing low-key things in the basic income space for literally decades. So I think we're keen to kind of identify who could be, who could be an ally or a champion, and really create space for them. And hopefully by being a big charity that's willing to come out first, we can create space for others. There's also a lot of opportunity because we're church-based, and the Anglican Church is, like, pardon the pun, a really broad church. Like, there's bits of it that are kind of low-key, well, not even low-key, high-key socialist, and then there are bits of it that are incredibly conservative. But there are parts of the church that are really interested in this, and I think because we find that people on the church side of the organisation, they're not obsessed with costs. They never talk about costs. They're really good having the values-based argument and kind of just telling the story. So perhaps there's also an opportunity there about engaging some of the church leaders in this. So those are just some kind of ideas that we're having. Yeah, and as I said before, I've said it a few times, but we are also really keen to try and engage the unions. So we've sort of put some feelers out to do some work there, and we're really hopeful that we can at least start a conversation.
Bernice, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Fighting with buttons. I wanted to step back to the issue of the unions. I was very surprised when you said that there was a union that was interested, because when I was thinking through it, and I'm going, well, who would be for, who would be against? And my thinking was unions would be against because their job would disappear, because their job is to make sure that they've got, decent wages for their members. Yeah. So I was wondering if you could explain the logic of how they got to a point of being for the UBI, not against it.
I think part of it is actually just from a top-down perspective. Their union leadership is on the more radical and creative side. They've a new union that's emerged. They've merged from a couple of actually, they were still quite big unions, but I think part of it is also just that they represent a highly casualised workforce. So one of the biggest industries that they represent, the United Workers Union, is aged care. And an aged care worker these days probably works at about 3 different facilities. It's been one of the big issues that we've had with COVID. But, they're kind of trying to piece together a solid income from a few different workplaces, and by necessity they don't really have a whole lot of job security or stable work conditions. That could be a part of it, but I actually do think in the case of the United Workers Union, my observation is that it hasn't really been a bottom-up thing where members have driven them to support something. I actually just think they've got really creative and interesting leadership. Yeah.
So what you're saying is that it makes sense for the United Workers Union because they're so, well, the workforce is casualised, but if, for example, we were to, I don't know, a not so casualised workforce, we wouldn't necessarily have the same thinking or the same thinking. I'll stick with that word.
Yeah. Okay. I suspect that a casualised workforce has been why they've been able to sell it to their members. But like I said, I don't know if it's been something that's been driven by the members in that case. I mean, I would love that if there was like this bottom-up worker-driven phenomenon backing a basic income. That would be amazing, and it could be a really powerful thing.
I'm actually thinking the other way around, in that if you manage to convince the leadership that they would go down. The bottom-up thing never occurred to me, because if I were a union member, I'd be turning around and going, yeah, but this isn't the kind of thing that the union would do. But that's an interesting point. Go bottom up and get the union members to convince it up the line.
Yeah.
I can work with that. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean the really honest answer is I don't know what led them to it, but I know that just Tim Kennedy has had a lot of interesting and creative ideas. They back a jobs guarantee too. I don't know if I said that before. They're one of the few organisations that's just seen and acknowledged that those two things don't have to be incompatible with each other.
Michael, unmute first.
Yep. Unmuted. It's been a fantastic discussion, Maiy. Just quickly picking up on the workers' side. I used to be manager of a Toyota production plant and dealing with the unions all the time. And one of the things that really was all about how do you share the productivity gains that the workers are helping to generate. And so to me, that role continues regardless of whether or not you have a UBI, because the UBI is just sitting there on the bottom and then you are earning on top. But what you want to know is, when I'm working for an organisation, am I getting a fair share of the value I'm adding to that organisation? And so I just struggle with the unions seeing it as a challenge, but that was just a simple observation. One of the things the other observations was that my daughter works for Uniting Care, and she sort of more at the coalface and talking with all of the people who are directly interfacing with the clients. All those people support a UBI, right?
Yeah.
Without exception, she said. And so it's really, I would think if the charities went back to the people who are actually working for them and dealing with their clients, they would say, yes, we support it, because my daughter said what they recognise is that they could move away from survival mode into helping people lift their lives up. You know, no, it's not about, can I find some food for today? You know, where am I going to stay tonight? Which is all the stuff day to day that they're dealing with. It's more than about, well, how do I manage my money? And, you know, what training do I know? You know, they get the mental space for that. And finally, with Emma Watson's concern about fear of targeted welfare, one of the other benefits of starting small and universal, even as low as $10 a week, and people sort of scoff at $10 a week, but if you pay a couple $20, that's eating one day. And so even starting low, but then treating the UBI as income for welfare. So don't change any of the welfare schemes. Don't touch them. Just treat the UBI as income, as if it was earned, but in this case, they're not having to earn it. As the UBI increases, then of course, welfare benefits will naturally tail off, but it would tail off if they were earning it, right? So that, I believe, is one way to possibly address that fear of losing welfare benefits as you introduce the UBI. So anyway, thank you very much. Been a great discussion, and I look forward actually to having another talk with you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Actually, I think this idea of starting small and universal instead of going for a more modest approach in the beginning has actually been a really interesting idea. Well, it honestly wasn't something that I'd thought of before tonight, but I think yeah, I think that's
we're in the
something for us
process
to think about
of
too.
preparing a paper that you might like to read. So
yeah,
The Basic Income Australia is, we're putting together our own proposal, and that's one of the elements that we've discussed is phasing it in ramping it up from a small amount across the whole population rather than as a way of phasing it in. Daniela, let's get your question. I'm sorry, I think you had your hand up, then it went down for a bit. I probably should have come to you earlier, but and Douglas will come to you next.
It's so good. No, thanks. It's a very interesting discussion, and thanks, Maiy, to I guess answer to all our questions. There's been many, so very interacting group. I'm quite new on, I'm actually originally from Italy, so I probably don't have all the information that I should in terms of UBI in Australia. I mean, that's the thing that I'm trying to understand. I guess the main outcome of UBI is ending the poverty, but what is the second outcome? Like, are they trying to get people to, I guess, more like a dignity state, of course, and a bit more a peace of mind and things like that, but also like moving them towards like become eventually like going back to work, be reinserted on the workplace as a, like, you know, work as a workforce. That's my first question. And the second question is people that they're working but they have like below a certain, I guess, like weekly salary, would they get the UBI as well? Or what we talked about before, like give the people a bit of more like time to actually live a life and not just chasing the dollar or things like that. Hopefully that makes sense.
I'm sorry, Danielle, I totally understood the second question, but the first one I didn't quite catch, I think because of your microphone. Would you mind asking the first part of the question again?
Sure. So what I assume and what been discussed today, the UBI, the first outcome is definitely like ending the poverty. The question is which one is the second outcome? It is like to reinsert these people on as part of the workforce, or it's more like get them to survive, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I'm feel free to jump in if I haven't understood the question correctly. You're right that the primary objective for us is ending poverty, and for us this is just the simplest and most obvious way to do that. Getting more people to work more hours because other people work less and things like that, those are kind of secondary goals, or they're side benefits. But for us the main aim is really to end poverty. I mean, arguably you could say that at a meta level, what we really want is dignity for every person. I'm not personally an Anglican, but Anglican theology kind of is a big part of our sort of philosophy at Anglicare, and it is all very interesting. But one of the reasons why we don't like the conditionality and a lot of the aspects of the social security system that we currently have is because I can't even believe I'm going to say this, actually. Like I said, I'm not personally religious, but there is this view in the Anglican theology that every human being is made in the eyes of God. So whoever they are, they're entitled to dignity. That's why when Austin said, "Oh, what if they're a terrible person? What if they're just lazy and they don't want to do?" They still just deserve basic human dignity. And not to live in poverty. That's just a basic, it's kind of a basic core tenet of Anglican theology, but it's also kind of, for me, just like a basic core tenet of, human decency. And so for us, poverty reduction is almost like a symptom of that. All these other things that we've tested for, more time volunteering, more time caring, that's great. It's good for society. It shows But for us, it's secondary. All of that just shows what you can achieve when people don't live in poverty, how much kind of human potential can be fulfilled if people aren't thinking. There's probably all kinds of other benefits that we can't even imagine, but because we can't, because we're so used to living in a society that has poverty as a permanent fixture of it. So all that other stuff for us, it's important, but it's secondary. It's all secondary to ending poverty. I hope that answers the first part of the question. I hope I've understood it. And I did understand the second part, but I've forgotten it now. So if you could repeat it, that would be great.
Yeah, no worries. So good. I guess the second question is who, like someone that is already like working but is kind of struggling financially, would they get the UBI or not?
Yes, absolutely. For us, the important thing is that everyone ends up with an income above the poverty line. And whether we give the same payment to everybody, or whether we're just guaranteeing that everybody ends up with an income above the poverty line, that's the goal. And so if you're working, but you're living in poverty, then yeah, the idea is to pull you out of poverty.
Douglas.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, sure. So in response to that whole conversation about the benefit to unions, just that Bernice was inquiring, 3 words: permanent strike fund. That's what UBI is. So it's definitely great for union members. Maybe it might reduce the need for union staff as much or as much revenue. But anyway, yeah, I had another point, but I've forgotten it. But yeah, that was the main thing, I guess.
We've got 4 minutes before we're meant to wrap up, and I think we've done an hour and a half, so we don't want to go much longer than that. Michael, you've got another question. Can we keep it to a minute or two so May's got time to answer before we wrap up?
Well, yeah, it's not so much a question more, May, it's more an observation that when we're talking about jobs, that probably 50% of the population can't do paid work, as you would know. They're young, they're old, they're incapacitated, the unpaid carers and so on. And those people can only get money from either savings or family if they're lucky, or they get it from welfare, charity and crime if they're not. And for about, as you said right at the very beginning, about 12 to 14% of the population, well over 3 million, those sources still leave them in poverty. So since those people can't work, they're the single mums with kids or elderly incapacitated, more jobs is not going to solve poverty. And therefore, UBI is the essential tool, because what those people are missing is money, and UBI gives them money. And so
I have to
would
interrupt, Michael. I have to interrupt, Michael, because you said that only unlucky people commit crimes. We know that lots of lucky people commit crimes as well. At, like, you know, the people collecting JobKeeper or whatever. I'm just teasing you, Joe. I'm just teasing you, Michael.
But yeah, I agree that there are people who, the top executives and others rip off far more than the people at the bottom. But the fact is that, I just want to absolutely encourage what you're doing, May. I think everything you've said tonight is spot on.
I'll let May have the last word in just a minute. I just want to have bring up one more thing. We talked tonight about why, you know, if it's a popular policy and if there's popular support for ending poverty, you know, we basically did end poverty during the initial part of the coronavirus pandemic. It wasn't a basic income, but we lifted, JobSeeker went above the poverty line, and we saw a huge reduction in poverty. Michael's talked about the reason, you know, his daughter wasn't getting the same number of calls from people in need, and I'm sure Anglicare saw the same thing. Now, we know why the government rolled that back, because they said why they were rolling it back. And they were rolling it back because they were worried that people weren't going to take low-wage jobs, right? They were worried that there wasn't a big enough difference between what people were getting on welfare and what they were getting in low-wage jobs, and rather than raise the amount that were being paid in low-wage jobs, they decided to cut the amount that people were getting back to below the poverty line. So, you know, I guess that's that decision and what it tells us about whose interests the government's serving when it makes decisions. I think that's very key to why we have a hard time pushing this. When we had Almaz Zaliki on a couple of episodes ago, an American expert, she says the people who don't want a basic income are people who are low-wage employers, who want people desperate to take low wages. And that's the big political blocker. I'll let you respond to that and then give us any closing thoughts, and then we'll wrap up for the evening.
Yeah, I think that's probably very, very true. Whenever we do our job snapshot every year, we get someone or other, some employer, tweeting at us saying, I've been advertising this job for 8 weeks and, I can't find anyone to fill it. And you look at it, you click on the link to it, and it's this incredibly insecure, couple of hours a week. And it's like, well, why would, job seeker might be a really, it might be a hard way to live. But at least you know how much you've got coming in, and why would people give up that security? You've got to reflect on how bad a job would have to be for someone to prefer having to interact with Centrelink and live on poverty, a poverty level income, not to do your job. And I mean, why would anybody do that? Why would anybody work hard in a insecure job that still leaves them in poverty? That's not laziness. That's actually just a perfectly rational, normal decision. I mean, I think I was thinking about something when Michael was speaking about how there's about half of the percentage, about half the population can't work anyway because they're young people or they're older people. And one of the things that we talk about in Anglicare and at Anglicare, and we've written about a few times, is and it's one of the reasons why we want to decouple work from poverty, is one of the things about work culture is that you don't value people who don't work. And you see this mentality when you hear people sort of toss around phrases like olderest, pensioners have contributed their whole life, which suggests their life is over. Or, when you hear people say things like, children are the future of society. All of that is about saying that they're not valued for who they are now. They're valued because of what they do when they're capable of earning an income and working. And we've called this report Valuing Every Contribution because it's about valuing every person. Every person is valuable regardless of whether they're working. Children should be valued for who they are now. They're not just the future, and older people shouldn't just be valued for things that they've done in the past. They're valuable because of who they are and what they're doing now. They're not less valuable just because they're not drawing an income, or they're not drawing an income from work, I should say. And so, that's what this is really about for us, I think, just valuing every person, valuing every contribution. I also just want to say I've really enjoyed the conversation tonight. It's been so much fun.
Okay, great. Well, we've enjoyed having you. We try and have these conversations once every month. This is actually the August one, the end of August one got spilled over into the beginning of September. So we'll probably be having another one at the end of September. Other people can who want to connect with us can join the Basic Income Action Group, which is going to be meeting tomorrow. You can find us on Meetup. Josh, did you want to say something about that? Josh? We still got Josh? Yes, he's here.
Yes, I would like to say that we are meeting at 4 p.m. tomorrow, and you can go to basicincomeaustralia.com to learn more information about it. There's an event link at the top of the page.
That's Sydney, Canberra, Melbourne time. Thank you, Maiy, for joining us, and we sure will be in touch in the future and hopefully get you back on another one of these groups, and we'll be in touch via the action group as well. So thanks again.
Thank you, Maiy. Good night.
Thanks so much. Lovely to meet you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And we've ended the stream.